Welcome back to another UNC Tar Heels football podcast here on TarHeelIllustrated.com. And if you're checking us out on our YouTube channel, Tar Heel Illustrated, I am THI Publisher Andrew Jones. Joining me is our Director of Football Recruiting, Miss Deana King, but we're not talking recruiting today. We're going to talk about the 2020 ACC football schedule that came out Wednesday afternoon. It was like Mardi Gras in the media because we all got something live to talk about. Deana, the Tar Heels have a 10-game ACC schedule, and that's what we're going to focus on here. And they get one non-conference game. We do not know the non-conference opponent at this time. And we'll throw around some options and stuff here in a few minutes. But let's hit on the 10-game slate. First of all, your thoughts, 10 games in the league, 5 at home, 5 on the road. A really interesting schedule. They get to play some teams they don't play very often this year, while also still playing Duke and still playing State in some of their more traditional games.
Well, like most people, I'm really excited that we've got some new news coming out, especially good news regarding football. I think it's big. Carolina's schedule, we'll look it over. We'll go into it a little bit later, but they got the natural rivalries, the Big Four. Championship could be available with playing Duke, State, and Wake Forest again. And I picked that. You said that's the Surratt Bowl again. They never thought they would probably play each other again. So that's a possibility. They play both Virginia schools, and then they get two of the Florida schools. So it's big news. It's different. I'm glad we got something finally to talk about.
I actually pulled myself away from the laptop from my office to go do something here for my family for 20 minutes. I wasn't even 20 minutes into it, and my phone's blowing up, and it's you. And you're like, did you see – I'm going to do your accent. Did you see that the ACC schedule came out? I'm like, you're kidding me. I was right in the middle of just being ready to do something with my daughter. Anybody who's a sports writer watching this, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You always settle in to do something with the family. Nah, something happens. You got to go run and deal with it. I was excited. It's one of the few times I'll ever say, you know what? We'll do that later. I'm really excited because it was so thrilling that a decision was made, especially when we were being told the last couple of days. Some reports were saying the league was going to punt it to next week. They went ahead and did it. They released a schedule. We don't know exactly the dates just yet at the time that we're recording this, but we got something. I was so excited. You know how excited I was because you heard my raw reaction. How excited were you when you saw it?
Well, I was just like shocked. I mean, when the email came out, I was like, oh, wow, I got to call AJ. So I did. And if for folks that don't really know, that was a legitimate fire drill, as we call it, where a fire drill is when breaking news comes out. We have to, it's like we're a bunch of firemen trying to rush around, go down that pole, get on that fire truck, and head and put the fire out. So AJ was trying to I was reading off the information AJ was typing. So it was a pretty good day.
We haven't had a lot of
slow day until all this excitement come out.
Yeah, we haven't had a lot of rushes lately. Even with the commits in football recruiting and stuff, we've kind of known what was going to happen before the announcement. So this was a nice rush that we haven't experienced. Let's dive into the schedule now. 5 home games, 5 road games for the Tar Heels. At home, they get Notre Dame, they get NC State, they get Virginia Tech. They get Wake Forest and Syracuse. Syracuse hadn't played in Chapel Hill since 2003, by the way. The road games at Florida State, at Miami, at Boston College, at Duke, and at Virginia. The 2 games in Florida that you mentioned, they actually played both FSU and Miami in Florida in 2016. They actually played them in a 3-week span, won both those games. That's the only time in Carolina football history where they actually won 2 true road games over ranked teams at the time. And that was huge because, the FSU game was Nick Wilder's field goal, running off the field doing this. And then the Miami game was the one game where the defense really stepped up and helped lead the team to victory. I think it was 20-13. So those were two really, really big wins for that season, maybe the biggest wins that team had that year. So it's kind of cool to get a chance to go back into the Sunshine State. So your thoughts looking at those 10 opponents, just first couple of thoughts that came to your head, and maybe right now.
Well, I know you love facts. And so when we broke down those teams, we were fact finding, seeing when UNC played, last time they played up in Chestnut Hill, we were looking up the Syracuse stuff, the FSU, and first time Carolina hadn't played Georgia Tech in what,
Since
1980?
Since 1979. They started playing in 80.
So,
they played 40 straight years until now.
and I'm sure a lot of the Carolina fans are like, man, why couldn't we have missed Georgia Tech several years with playing that Paul Johnson, that option offense, that gave Carolina a fit so many times. So I think it's a really good schedule for Carolina. Every team that's on that list, Carolina has the ability to win those games. And as you know, if anything happens like it did last year, it's going to be full of excitement because we know Carolina's going to be able to move the ball. They've got almost everybody back on offense, and so if they can fill some spots on defense, who knows what this Tar Heel team can do.
Well, let's quickly take a look at these games. We're not going to do full-blown analysis or anything like that. We're just going to kind of take a snapshot of these 10 games, starting with the 5 home games. Again, we don't know the order, so we're just going to go the 5 home games first, 5 road games second. I think NC State and Syracuse are probably the least challenging of the 10 opponents they have. And I'm not saying that they're not going to be challenging teams. NC State's got a lot to play for this year. They've done well in Chapel Hill. I think they've won 3 out of 4, maybe 4 out of 5 in Chapel Hill. I'll have to check those numbers. And Syracuse, the club that beat Carolina 2 years ago in the Carrier Dome. So they're not pushovers, but I think those are the lesser of those 10 opponents. Carolina should win those games. I would think that they should beat Wake as well. If UNC's trajectory is what a lot of people think that it is, you shouldn't lose to Wake at home, even though Wake's got a solid team. There should be 3 wins right there. You've got Virginia Tech, which is a nemesis, and Virginia Tech's done very well in Chapel Hill. That, to me, is an absolutely must-win game. No matter what else happens on the schedule, they've got to beat the Hokies. They had that 6 overtime game last year. They could have won that game many, many times over. They didn't. That game gave a ton of life to Virginia Tech's season. The Tar Heels have had really bad losses at home to them before. The 2016 loss, the one that came after those, during that little sequence there in October when they went to Tallahassee and Miami, terrible loss for that team. That's a must-win game, probably slight edge to Carolina. And then, of course, Notre Dame. If Carolina takes care of business and it wants to get to the ACC championship game and probably play Clemson, it's going to probably have to beat Notre Dame. I think 9-1, 10-0 is the kind of thing they may have to do it because the Irish have a pretty favorable schedule outside of playing at Carolina and hosting Clemson. And so you hit on those 5 home games first, and then we'll talk about the road games. I think 4-1 at home is probably a fair expectation. Let's remember they were 7-6 a year ago. They had to win their last 2 games to get to a bowl. So they weren't crushing. They weren't, they were improving. They made a lot of progress, and they do have question marks up front on the defensive line. So I think 4-1 is fair looking at that home schedule.
Yeah, I agree with all your assessments. The Virginia Tech game, yeah, it absolutely. Carolina fans, they want to beat Virginia Tech. That's one of the games that all the fans talk about, that, they got to beat Virginia Tech to help in recruiting. They're beating Virginia Tech in the recruiting game the last couple of years, so they gotta do it on the field. 4-1 is I like those odds. With possible 5-0 if they can beat Notre Dame. That game's going to be a really a highlighted game, marked, circled, whatever, because it's who it is. It's a national brand, national following. Notre Dame coming to Keenan. That would be a really big big game for the Tar Heels.
Especially if it's later in the year and both teams are having really good seasons. And as the season goes on, maybe they allow more and more fans into the stadium. Imagine a night game at Keenan in early November, like when they played UVA last year, with the Irish in town and an awful lot at stake. Keenan would be pretty electric. The 5 road games at Miami, I mean, as I wrote my column, Miami's range is mediocre to really good. And every year, people kind of predict Miami, okay, here's the year they're going to break out, they're going to explode, and they're going to do what Miami used to do, or at least come close to it. Similar to the year they had a couple of years ago when they ended up losing to Pitt at the end of the year and kind of stumbled a little bit. It's kind of hard to project going forward about how that game might play out with the Tar Heels. I would say probably on the surface, you might figure that's probably a loss. Going to Tallahassee, they've won 2 in a row in Tallahassee, both field goal situations as time expired. And I think they will probably be favored to win in Tallahassee if you just look at what's on paper right now. They go to UVA. UVA won the Coastal last year, expected to be a drop-off, but Bronco Mendenhall has got something going there. I don't think they're going to be as bad or drop off as much as some people think. It'll be a challenging game, especially if it's at night in Charlottesville. And then BC, with the way they play, a little bit more ball control, a little more grinding. They got big guys up front that can maul you a little bit. That'll be an interesting test for the Tar Heels, especially if it's late in the year. It was originally scheduled to be in November, so if it still is in November, I think that will increase the degree of difficulty in that game. And the other one is at Duke. That Duke has made, under Cutcliffe especially, Duke has made that game a war almost every year. There are very few games in which either team runs away. So I think that'll be a test as well. I think the road schedule is a little more difficult than some of the thoughts I'm hearing and reading from people initially, and it will be a bit of a challenge. I think 4-1 on the road, Carolina fans should be thrilled. But I do think, maybe losing at Miami, maybe losing one of those other games, a 7-3 ACC schedule, because they might not fully have arrived yet, was probably a pretty fair assessment looking ahead. What do you think?
Well, I think it kind of depends. Well, Florida State under a new coaching staff, and I believe if, Carolina plays them really early in the season, that's going to be beneficial because a new staff and they've hardly even got started, and how tough it was for Coach Brown and his staff to start when he did. And can you imagine being a new coach and going through this pandemic and everything like Coach Norvell is doing and everything? So Miami, they're going to have a new quarterback, the transfer. And so Hurricanes are always really good at home. And I expect a humid, whenever they play, a humid atmosphere. As far as Boston College, we have no clue about them. I personally don't have much.
They're going to run the ball. They're going to block you at the line of scrimmage. They're going to cross block. They're going to pull. They're going to just man up and just turn their guy and hope to get 3-4 yards and keep plugging away at that thing. That's what they're going to do. Well, Virginia, and Carolina's front line defensively has a lot to prove. It's the biggest question mark on the team. So while I agree with you about FSU, the earlier that game was played, the better for UNC. I think at least from a defensive line standpoint, they get some games under their belt before they have to go deal with that in Chestnut Hill. Probably would help Carolina too, especially when they go up there, the weather's not terrible.
Yeah, and Virginia, they lost their all-world quarterback, so they got to replace him. And Duke, like you said, Duke's a war. It's a rivalry game. Those teams could be 0-10, and they would probably, like to kill each other. And everybody knows what happened last year in that classic. And so I expect, I do agree with you about the away schedule is a little bit more challenging. But if they can sneak away with another 4-1, Miami's a question mark. So yeah. I'm not really. I mean, if they can go 8-2, 9-1, I think it just depends on Notre Dame. I mean, that could get them. Main important thing is to beat Notre Dame, I think, because
Well,
I feel that game is going to be. Everybody knows Clemson's going to probably be the other one, and who's going to be that second team? It's a race for that second team.
well, I think Carolina certainly has an opportunity to be that team, and I'm not predicting 7-3 right now. I'll do my formal picks here in a couple of weeks, but I just think that sometimes that gradual process, it kind of hits every step along the way, especially the ones that are the most fortified. And maybe this team does explode this year, and the defensive line's a lot better than some people expect, and they have a solid rotation in the secondary that is consistent every week. They got a lot of guys back there, but they got to figure that stuff out before they get to the opener. And they're going to get a little bit more time for the opener now, I guess, than they would have before. So because they didn't have spring practice, they're going to get a few extra days, which I think will help them out a lot. They have a non-conference game that, as of the time that we're recording this, has not been determined, has not been released anyway. Do you take the approach that, okay, if you think 9-1 is possible, maybe even more so, you got that opportunity to play Clemson at the end there, that you think, okay, if we want to make a national splash, we've got to play somebody good outside the league? Or do you take the approach that let's get someone who's not very good, especially since we have a spring practice, we need to take a look at some of these kids, and I'm not going to name any schools, but you bring in an FCS type that is playing, you try to get him in fairly early if the league affords you that weekend, and get one of those games under your belt to take a look at a lot of kids. Because as it stands, especially if you look at last year when all 6 of their losses were combined by 24 points, you may not get opportunities to look at those guys if you don't schedule something like that. What is your approach?
Coach Brown came back to Chapel Hill to win a national title. You got to play the best to get there. And if you're going to play a cream puff, you know, and win, you know, and I know the reasons for that, so you can build depth, but if I'm a Tar Heel fan, I want to play Auburn, play them in, if they play, even if they can come to Charlotte, if something can be made there, halfway. Auburn, that ain't very far. Auburn's not that far from Charlotte. Carolina, play it in the Bank of America Stadium. If Auburn is not willing to come to Chapel Hill, they could make that a series or something. But you know, the fan, they want to see these Carolina they're trending upward. So to keep going upward, I think you got to play a national team, a Georgia, Auburn type, even a Tennessee, you know. So I mean, like the SEC, ACC, there's so many natural rivalries.
Yeah.
You know, so
I think play, if you can get a game against the SEC, I think you take it and run.
Yeah.
I do understand the idea of building the depth and playing a lesser opponent, so you can do that. But if your team's really good, that depth can be built somewhat during practice. I mean, Bobby Bowden used to do that. He used to put guys in who were second and third team for a couple of years, and they were juniors. They started, and they were perfectly fine. If you load the roster with talent, you're going to get a lot of experience in practice. I know it's not the same as game experience, but I agree. I'm not a big fan of Power 5 teams playing FCS teams anyway. I don't think they should. I think the ACC should say no more Syracuse versus Wagner games. You know, no more Miami versus Charleston Southern. That doesn't do anybody any good except the pocketbook of the FCS school. And I don't think it's Power 5 teams' obligation to worry about that and to help those teams out. They need to help themselves out and help their league out. If Carolina is the team a lot of people think they can be, and they have a quality win over an SEC team outside the league, and they do really well in the league, and Notre Dame is as good as people think, and Clemson does what they can, the ACC could have 3 really highly rated teams, and that's not even considering what Miami can be. I think a lot of people think Virginia Tech could be sneaky good this year. They could be back in the top 25, and Louisville is a club that some people think has a chance to really have a good year. I think for the ACC strength and for Carolina building for the future, like you said, Matt came back to win a national championship. Tony Grimes told us in Virginia Beach, we're going to win a natty at Carolina. You know, a lot of these kids that you talk to on a regular basis that are committing to play in this program, they're not talking about how they want to go there because of the Jordan brand, like maybe the kids did a couple years ago. They're talking about competing for a national championship. So to win a national championship within the next few years or compete for one, you've got to take that mindset now. So I agree with you. I would play the best possible team they could play in that game that would be willing to come to Chapel Hill or whatever can be worked out. I know that there's some limitations now with what the ACC came out with today, but if you could make it happen, make it happen. Any final thoughts about what we found out earlier today?
Just to add on that, you know, if that doesn't happen, they got some options in state. I mean, with Appalachian and Charlotte, East Carolina, and even North Carolina A&T, if they are stressed into finding an opponent, and maybe even, you know, James Madison was on the schedule before all this, but I'm glad we're talking about something new, and you know that.
Yeah.
We talked and had podcasts and articles. We're this is just like Christmas Day, maybe.
Yeah, and we opened up that package, and there were 10 opponents for the Tar Heels, and some of them weren't on our radar beforehand. We weren't thinking about them preparing for the season. Now we get to. I think it's exciting. I'm glad it's here. We're that much closer to having football. I don't know how many fans are going to be allowed in the stadium. I don't even know what the media situation is going to be. And right now, I'm not going to worry about it. I'm just glad we've got stuff to write about. We've got stuff to talk about. And it's not the same old, same old. It's something new, different, and exciting. She's Deana King. I'm Andrew Jones. You are watching us on TarHeelIllustrated.com and Tar Heel Illustrated, our YouTube channel. If you like this video, go ahead and click like. Hit the notification bell to subscribe and get updates on all the videos that we upload, and we do plenty. Thanks for stopping by.